It was a sultry summer evening when I started my shift at Quiznos, the prestigious restaurant that had become my second home. I'd worked there for years, and while the name might not sound intimidating, Quiznos held its own brand of horrors that went beyond anything you'd find in the supernatural. The place was a relic of a bygone era, with dark wood paneling, plush leather booths, and antique chandeliers that hung low, casting eerie, wavering shadows. From the outside, it looked like a cozy haven for fine dining, but as I would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. As I stepped into the restaurant, the unsettling ambiance settled over me like a heavy shroud. I couldn't help but feel that something was off. The usual hustle and bustle of patrons and the clatter of plates were conspicuously absent. My coworker, Jake, greeted me with a nervous smile as I clocked in. "Slow night, huh?" I said, trying to mask the unease creeping through me. Jake nodded. "Yeah, you could say that. But it's not just slow, it's strange. You'll see." With that ominous remark hanging in the air, I began my routine tasks. I sliced tomatoes, laid out bread, and prepared ingredients with the diligence I'd perfected over the years. As I worked, I noticed that the restaurant's usually cheerful ambiance was replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I looked out the window at the fading sunlight, feeling a sense of dread I couldn't explain. This place had always been peculiar, but tonight, it was as if the building itself had absorbed the shadows and was exhaling them onto the staff. Just as I was finishing up the prep work, I heard a faint, unidentifiable sound from the back of the kitchen. It was like a distant whisper, too faint to make out words. My pulse quickened and I exchanged a glance with Jake. He had heard it too. "That's the sound I was talking about," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "It's been happening for weeks now. We've tried to find the source, but nothing." I gulped, my throat suddenly dry. "Have you told the manager?" Jake nodded. "He's as baffled as we are. He even called in an expert to check for pests, but they found nothing." As the night wore on, the feeling of dread continued to build. Our handful of patrons whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed as if afraid to disturb the unsettling quiet. The low hum of the antique chandeliers seemed to grow louder, resonating through my skull. I couldn't shake the feeling that the restaurant was alive, that it was watching us, and that it harbored a malevolence I couldn't comprehend. As I took a tray of sandwiches to a booth in the far corner, a chill raced down my spine. I set the tray down, and for a moment, I swore I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced a smile at the couple in the booth. "Enjoy your meal," I stammered, before quickly retreating. The night wore on, and the inexplicable sounds grew more frequent. Whispers turned into faint cries, and every now and then, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. Jake and I tried to ignore the mounting unease, going about our duties as if everything was normal. But our hands trembled as we made sandwiches, and our laughter sounded forced and hollow. As the clock ticked closer to closing time, a group of 3 men walked in. They were dressed in tailored suits, their faces obscured by shadows. They took a booth near the back, and I couldn't help but shiver as I approached them. "Welcome to Quiznos," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What can I get for you?" One of the men looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine. They were cold and empty, like the gaze of a predator sizing up its prey. "We'll have 3 of your finest sandwiches," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. I nodded and retreated to the kitchen, where Jake was busy washing dishes. "Those guys give you the creeps too?" I muttered. Jake nodded, not taking his eyes off the dishes. "Something's not right about them." I quickly made their sandwiches, my hands trembling as I sliced the bread. When I returned to the booth, I couldn't help but glance around nervously. The eerie silence of the restaurant had become suffocating. The men ate in silence, their eyes never leaving me. I felt like a mouse being watched by a trio of hungry snakes. When they finally finished, they got up and left without a word, their footsteps echoing ominously in the empty restaurant. As the clock struck midnight, Jake and I began the closing routine. We were both eager to leave the oppressive atmosphere of Quiznos behind. But as we started shutting off lights and locking doors, the unsettling sounds grew louder and the shadows seemed to deepen. "Let's hurry up and get out of here," Jake muttered, his voice shaky. I nodded in agreement, my heart pounding in my chest. We made our way to the front entrance, and as Jake turned the key in the lock, a voice whispered in my ear, "Stay." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I turned to see who had spoken, but there was no one there. Jake looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice quivering. I nodded, my entire body trembling. "We need to leave, now." We practically ran out of the restaurant, not bothering to lock the door behind us. The night air was a welcome relief, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. As we stood on the sidewalk, we glanced back at the restaurant. The antique chandeliers was still visible through the window, their dim light flickering ominously. And then, as if in response to our gaze, one of the chandeliers suddenly crashed to the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Jake and I exchanged horrified glances, and without another word, we turned and fled into the night. We never went back to Quiznos, and we never spoke of that night again. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that restaurant, but I know one thing for sure. There are horrors in this world that have nothing to do with the supernatural, and Quiznos was a place that harbored secrets that were better left undisturbed.